It's not for بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وبه نستعين وهو الأول وهو الآخر وهو الظاهر وهو الباطن لا إله إلا هو لا إله إلا الله. السلام عليكم. This is, inshallah, will be the final talk on the great master Nifarri, not because he has, we have gone through all of his works, but I think it becomes at some point overwhelming unless you want to look at it as an academic and scholarly approach. You can spend years looking at it, assessing it, parsing it. But I think if you're really engrossed on the path and you see the interactions between the written word, the conditions, the circumstances of the time, and as your maturity evolves, as your spiritual maturity, I don't like that word, but anyway, it becomes more and more, panorama becomes really very, very overwhelming. And if you keep on immersing into it, as I said earlier, you can blow a gasket, which is something I don't want to do. I find these talks and sessions quite, not so much exhausting, but they engage you with the words you speak. And maybe it has to do with, inshallah, with one's sincerity, that commitment, that they take on a form that propels you along this curve, as it were. So I think by these sessions, one has not understood, at least at the most elemental level, not necessarily at a very complexified level. Then I think very difficult to continue much more. However, inshallah, all of you have at least began to have some glimpses or some idea as to what this person, incredible state of being, was experiencing practically every moment. We find it hard to contain this, even under very sort of normal, ordinary conditions. You're lucky to have onrush or a khatar once a year or twice a year. Imagine if you have that all the time. It becomes like a complete overwhelming of the person. And perhaps this is necessary if you are either given that access or somehow by your passage you reach that gateway. So what I will do today, inshallah, is to go through perhaps two of the Mawaqif, which I find extremely potent because they distill the essence of what he's saying, Nifarri, and what I think all the great beings. It's articulated sometimes in very strange ways. When it comes down to it, we have to deal with reality, which is said to us over and over again. In Arabic, the Quran says, لَيْسَ كَمَثَلُهُ شَيْءٍ. There is nothing like unto him. So there is nothing like unto him. The process of trying to bound or to limit or to contain nothing is like unto him, is by definition quixotic. But nevertheless, we are told that there's nothing like unto him. But then there is a whole sort of architecture of spiritual insights, commands, sometimes instructions, of opening, that seem to be disconnected. If there's nothing unto it, how can the scope of the human experience, the faculties that we have, whether they're reason, imagination, or the imaginal, how can we ever aspire, begin to understand what, in essence, is a process that can have no ending, at least within our span of existence? There's a principle in philosophy called Occam's razor, which is that if you take a very complex phenomenon, what appears to be a complex set of circumstances, if you reduce it to a basic principle, you will get, as it were, the core of it. Simplification is the essence of this philosophical principle, and it seems to work in most cases. And when we talk about Tawheed, we talk about oneness, that you bring multiplicity to oneness. But actually, this is in some ways a conceit. We think it's one, but it's more like a fog. You have this complex phenomenon called existence. You're perched on top of it, swimming in it, and you think that by simplifying it, by bringing everything to a point, somehow the ambiguities will go. But Nifarri says they won't go. In fact, it is an assertion. You assert that by bringing the multiplicity that we see all around us, and reduce it to oneness, or reduce it to a set of principles, whether they are names, conditions, or whether they are attributes, whatever. It can be love, compassion, mercy, power, victory. That somehow, by going through this route, you are approximating or beginning to understand the reality behind it. But the first statement says you cannot understand that reality. So all these structures that we have, whether they are spiritual structures, or they are religious structures, philosophical structures, or aesthetic structures, or cultural structures, or whatever, that we use as a kind of scaffolding for us to understand reality, are really nothing of the sort, because starting point is that reality cannot be understood. So what is this then all about? Of course, this is part of the existentialist arguments philosophers of the last, especially in the post-war era, even going back to Kierkegaard, that it leads you to a kind of despair, because it's impossible to reach a degree of certainty with which you can feel you are at equilibrium. In fact, Nifarri says the opposite. All the great traditions, in particular those that are based on revelatory experience, their claim is not that you're going to find certainty in or within a specific set of parameters or specific routes. You will somehow find one behind the many. But you will be in a condition where you sense that there is a reality that governs all of that. Whether you have access to it or not, or whether you're even able to approximate it or not, is never possible. But that doesn't mean that you do not continue to organize and structure material, spiritual life with the possibility of that knowledge emerging. So, as you approach reality, and that's what Mawaqif of Niffari is about, because think of it as a perch in which you see all of existence reducing, and as you're about to grasp it, it turns into a fog, turns into a mist. Now, the existentialists or the atheists would say, oh, there's nothing there. But the argument is, in fact, an inverse one. It's because it turns into a fog. You know there's something there. And that is what the Mawqif is. That is what the halting point of Nifarri is all about. It's at the point where boundlessness never makes itself aware to you, because if it does, it's bounded. But it's a point at which existence understands being, or understands the possibility of being. So there is something which we call being, which we can never reach. We can do all kinds of acrobatics and somersaults, all kinds of rituals and prayers. Exoterically, it cannot be reached. Punto. Esoterically, it cannot be reached either. Punto. What can be achieved, though, is the knowledge that there is a reality there. Now, that's the starting point. This is the end point of the Mawaqif, the starting point of one's spiritual life or spiritual rebirth, outside of the formal structures with which we have been engaged in the past, or outside of the formal mechanism that we thought of as being pathways, because that is somehow what is desired or expected of us. Now, what is the connecting thread between the two? How does existence, us, everything that has been brought into being, how does that relate to being? What is the mechanism? Well, again, I go back to what can be distilled out of it, and also out of the revelatory text like the Quran. What can be distilled out of it is the awareness or the consciousness. There is something in us called consciousness. That consciousness is an aspect of our existence. It is we don't know where it comes from, and we don't know where it's going. But we know it is a force, a field that allows you to transact with what is beyond sentient capability of human beings to relate to. So the consciousness that we moderns talk about is in fact the Mawaqif of Niffari. Now, I'm now interpreting modern terms and modern constructs of the 8th century, but to me there's no other explanation. The way that has spilled out of it is not in the form of a rigorous discursive exercise through argumentation, through analysis, through reason, or even through a kind of series of states. It's a kind of it's an immersion. It's as if a fish. How does a fish know it's in the water? Only because there are currents. If there's no currents, the fish cannot understand that it's in a medium. It's born into that medium. It relates to that medium, but not in a way which engages its being. Similarly, the way in which the Mawaqif, and there's a difference between a person who is who is a Waqif according to Nifarri, and the other great spiritually realized beings, including people such as the Arif, the person with gnosis, or the Alim, the person with knowledge. Each of these degree lower in perception and degree lower qualitative understanding than the Waqif. Consciousness is the movement in the medium with which we as existent beings acknowledge reality, without necessarily understanding it or without necessarily ensuring that whatever claims we make, whether in the form of assertions or denials. And to me, this is the core of the Shahada. I mean, the Shahada starts with La ilaha. It means the human being has resigned, has admitted in a conscious, responsible way that there is no means, there is no mechanism by which he or she will ever be able to engage with this reality except by acknowledging it. Now, what we say about that reality, it has these attributes, whether it has these forms, whether these aspects of it are more real than the other aspects, is really, for our purposes, they are subjective. They are not an objective reality. So when you say Allah is love, or Allah is power, or Allah is whatever, any of the names, it doesn't mean that this assertion is true. And that's why when you go back and read Nifarri, it is as if you're mirrors upon mirrors upon mirrors upon mirrors. It is a way in which the limitations of language, of meaning, try to find some kind of satisfying equilibrium with the limitless, with the imperceptible. And this is me, not me. The essence of imperceptibility, what is imperceptible, is its unknowability. And the imperceptibility of essence is its condition. So when you make a statement like that, the response to that in modern times has been kind of despair or kind of permanent anxiety. It should, in fact, have the opposite. It should have the most ecstatic and thrilling effect, because your certainty, even though it's ambiguous, even though it doesn't have concrete delimitations to it, it is a true certainty. It is a true yaqeen, even though it is delimited. So one of the key deliverables or takeaways that you want to take out of these talks is that boundlessness is approachable but never understandable. Its nature is our inability to understand it is embedded in me. Once we try to cross these boundaries, we may end up in a heightened state of awareness, heightened state of certainty within our ambiguity. But we must not confuse this with truth. This is small truth. And in my mind, the entire sort of range of human experience is to do with that. To try to, the way in which human beings have tried to limit the boundaries has given rise to all kinds of civilizations, cultures, religions, art movements, cultural movements, discoveries. When it comes down to it, this is what it's all about. The passage of human beings through time. If you notice, Nifarri never talks in terms of time. Time doesn't feature There's no historicity to it. You can't say, well, he's a man of the 9th century. He's a man of the 9th century only because the language, but the ideas, conditions, and circumstances he had are, in my mind, eternal. They are valid at each point. Now, he expressed it in ways that were understood to some extent, can be extremely obscure in the time of the period, or it was expressed for him. But if you interpret it, if you project it to contemporary conditions, you find it's ever fresh because it is not constrained by time. So whether this is a form of revelation, I still don't quite understand how revelatory experience works. It doesn't happen to me, but the whole idea of these chinks that open up and a kind of flood overwhelms the individual. Prophets, great beings like Rumi, there has to be a kind of continuum between inspiration, which the Greeks connected to music, and between revelation. So at the one end of the spectrum are prophetic experiences, which are experiences that are undeniable to the recipient. So the recipient may be completely different, completely maybe a shepherd, or farmer, or a prince. And suddenly there's this force through which the unseen expresses it. Now, the reverse is not true. Prophets can never understand. And the Quran, if you use that as your revelatory guide, it says, he reached the limits of the bounded Sidrat al-Muntaha, the low tree of the furthest point. Did not or could not go through. So prophets knew the relationship to the unseen. Rumi, I have not emerged as much as you have in him. But he is the prophet of love, you want to call it that. It's this bird in flight has one wing, the wing of awe, which is main experience of the Quran, and the other wing, the wing of love, then something like a revelatory experience may have happened to him. And Nifarri, I think, had that, because it is not the outpouring logician, outpourings of the philosopher, or outpourings even of a mystic. It is this constant attempt to make sense of the boundaries, and when you are at the boundary, when you are at that Mawaqif, that halting point. And that halting point, he says, he talks about 65 or whatever. There can be 6,000, I don't know, there can be 2. The numbers don't really matter. There are basically 1,000 variations on one theme. The theme is juxtaposition of the boundaries with the boundaries. And it's expressed this Mawaqif of the Syrian, Muslims, of fear and so on. But in reality, these are, as I said, variations. Various points on this line, or acts as a barrier, the final barrier. And this is something that we have to, I think, internalize. When we are hoping to have access, as it were. The access is really to us rather than to the unseen. And you can create a world that is a much brighter world, much more enjoyable, thrilling, even though it revolves around assertions and states. But it is not the world of where time and space and matter do not figure. We have to be very, very careful. So with that in mind, I'll try to. There are really seven points in all of this in the Nifarri corpus. The first I mentioned is the Mawaqif, the whole principle of the halting point at the moment. And then the individual Mawaqif. As I said, he has, I don't know how many, 65. But these can be basically tailor-made by you. You can have one particular Mawaqif, one particular halting point, which is uniquely yours, in which there's dialogue. It is not really a dialogue, in which you hurl out your words, or you hurl out your exclamation and your question. And what you hear, you think is a response. But in reality, that response is filtered. And once it's filtered, it's no longer a response. It's not the voice from the ghayr. But that, nevertheless, it is a form of truth. And that is your individual. The third takeaway from all of this is the waqif itself, or herself, the individual. Why does this individual have the pretension or conceit of making assertions? All of the dialogues that exist in the Mawaqif, the halting point, are filtered through the conceit and the pretensions. Now, you can sublimate them, eliminate them. So the conceit of the alim, person who is in love with knowledge, thinking or seeking knowledge as being the gateway to the unseen. He's in love with that knowledge. He is not in awe of the impossibility of that knowledge being anything but not even a fraction of total knowledge. It's not even a fragment. It's a different species of knowledge. Or you move to the mystic or the Gnostic, who is very, very happy with the rampart that he or she has built around him, and are enthralled with their thraldom. So the waqif is a superior being than either of these. The waqif is a person who has completely resigned the possibility of reaching a dialogue that has any aspect of it which deals with the haqq or the truth with a capital T. And then the other grades, the arif, without necessarily denigrating them, without necessarily saying that there is a certain superiority or inferiority. And then he comes to what has been also very, very common theme amongst the Gnostics, both Islam and other spiritual, especially the Abrahamic tradition. It's the other than. The other, there's reality or Allah, there is ma siwa Allah. There's reality and there is what is not real. So what is not is a very profound statement, a waqif, person at the whole truth can make, because that distinguishes and makes clear the impossibility of any assertion having in them aspects of the truth. So truth or haqq is indivisible. And we can't claim to have access to bits and pieces. We can't claim to make that I have done this and therefore I'm closer to the ideal. The names and are constructs we make in order to engage with reality. Now, very few people have been able to say that, at least in the religious culture. Even until now, you can't say it. To have your head, especially these days. If you say them, you have to qualify them. So many points. The truth is taken away from you. But to me, the Deen of Islam has been a continuous process of reducing and eliminating essentiality. And you have now a whole structure, whole superstructure that is confused in people's mind practice. And this is true for not just Islam, but for all other Abrahamic, as well as for all other philosophical, all other systems based on some kind of notion of the ideal and the real, including systems that have nothing to do with religion, is that the accretions that are made onto them begin to have a life of their own. I think one of the most profound lessons that I have people say all the time is reducing it to the essentiality doesn't bring it that much closer to you understanding it, but it tells you that ma siwa Allah, what is not reality. You're able then to dismiss, sometimes with a smile, sometimes with a grimace, all assertions made of it. And that must empower and give people a great deal of confidence when dealing with all various kinds of authority. Standard then ceases to be standard of authoritative expression. The standard becomes one that is much more subtle, much more luminous. Now, subtlety and luminosity, we think, bring us closer to reality. But that's an assertion. It's a good assertion. You can make good assertions with good consequences. By good, I mean in terms of the effect and impact. And you can make assertions that bad consequences. But no assertions that we make are assertions that the real makes about itself. So terms like light and dark, luminous, dense, God, man, all of these dialectics that we use to express as ways of understanding the heart really lose their meaning or lose their import. There are mechanisms by which the manifestations used in order to hide permanently reality from those who don't have it. So what can be a very dense, difficult text to read, once you have the keys to them, and I'm assuming that I've said, inshallah, keys I think of them, understanding this. You can use them also. Use these keys to reread text, have within them a revelatory context. I've always benefited. You see things then in a different light, and including text of great inspiration, revelatory text, but the great inspiration. So we have time to conclude. the one that the last one, which is the Mawaqif of the truth of gnosis. In the second line, he says, he stayed me in the truth of gnosis. So called to witness Gabriel and Michael, and called to witness the throne and the bearers of the throne, and called to witness every angel and every possessor of gnosis. And thou shalt see the realities of the state, saying and bearing witness that there is naught like unto. Of course, the Arabic reads much better. This is what I was trying to elaborate, is that every element of hierarchy that we conceive as being the hierarchy of spiritual realms, from the realm of Islam, start from the realm of Alam al-Jabarut, Alam al-Mulk, the various seven heavens, the mystical sort of architecture of Islam. There are these realms in which kinds of forces dwell. And between realms and each realm there's connecting. And classically there can be more. And what he's saying that at each of these realms, it's like an accordion, they collapse when they are faced with reality. They just say there's nothing like hunter. Not nothing. There is, you cannot make a similitude. The veil shall be rent, and in the rending is an onslaught which cannot be supported by the nature of created state. So, there are many books in Sufi tradition about hijab and kashf, renting of the veil itself. He says, forget about that, because if you do it, the created things cannot see it, cannot actually see through it. Once you enter, they're just destroyed. You cease to exist. If the veil were raised and not rent, he that is under it would find rest. But it is rent. By rent, I suppose, torn. And when it is torn, the gnosis of the Gnostic will be forgotten. And in the forgetting, it will be clothed in a light which will enable it to endure what is manifested after the rending of the veil. For by the aid of the gnosis of the veil, it cannot endure what is manifested in the rending of the veil. So raising it is an act of grace. Why it happens, when it happens, we don't know. But you raise it in an eternity. The access is a fleeting one. Anything more than just a fleeting ambiguity destroys here. And this is what I was referring to, the ambiguity of certain. Is that there's no contradiction between the two. We think of something being ambiguous, being not discernible, we don't know its limit, we cannot weigh it, measure it, we cannot relate to it. Its contours are unknown. But the ambiguity of a present does not deny the present. It's just that you cannot fashion it. So the other Mawaqif, which I have chosen, is it's a Mawaqif beyond the Mawaqif. That is, what happens when you're just at that edge? Well, at that edge, one eye looks back at all existence, all creation. The other eye cannot see anything, because if you try to see, you just cannot. It's like the veil cannot be cannot be torn. Phenomenal existence is a staying. Every part of phenomenal existence means that every aspect points to the ambiguity of it, points to the present, points to a present. And again, there are many ayahs in the Quran, and I'm sure in other levels texts, which point to that, which point to that everything in a state of worship. And the Quran says everything is in worship, but we cannot understand how to worship. This chair is worship. The worship is not that it's doing a kind of supplication or a kind of, it is a kind of metaphysical acknowledgement of dependent presence. So when we recognize that this is the reality, it's in a state of constant acknowledgement of presence. He says that there is temptation in every staying. Actually, the word in Arabic is waswas, which is not really poorly disturbance in every halting point. And vain thought in every phenomenal existence. That is, the sum total of human knowledge is inconsequential to knowledge of presence, or understanding the nature of presence. Reality subsists in the sciences. I suppose he means knowledge rather than natural science. And temptation supervenes in the conditions of it. When disturbances come upon you, regard its coming and going and your opposition to it, and you shall see the reality and contemplate it. For it is the reality in you that denies it. And you shall see falsehood and contemplate it, for it is the falsehood which you deny. Ignorance is beyond the staying. Stay in this, for it is beyond the station of this world and the next. What he means here is not ignorance in the sense of lacking knowledge, but ignorance in the sense of knowing that you don't know. So it is one of the highest forms of knowledge. Ignorance is beyond this state. That is, if you are at this halting point and you affirm your inability to go any further, that affirmation is the highest form, the highest principle of knowledge. Stay in this, for it is beyond the station of this world and the next. So the realm offered, promised, are realms that are within the conditioned experience and conditioned consciousness of human beings. They have a reality, a small r. But this reality is again, it is one that is anchored to the conditional consciousness, the limited consciousness, the ability for us to relate effort to reward. Either it's a reward or it is a presence that we want. But when you affirm that your incapacity is total, beyond this last halting point, then all of this world and the next become really ephemeral. You are imposing or superimposing a certain set of rules, a certain set of required outcomes that you may have been promised through revelatory experience. But this promise is not conditional. It is passed through your own consciousness. I think this is, again, possibly the most profound insight that I've taken, is that beauty of knowing not known and acting on it is again a passport to a very, very fulfilling, expansive. Really all I can say about it at this point. He has some other works which are, they're called mukhatabat, which are like very short, pithy exclamations, not necessarily in dialogue. And it is again spoken in terms of reality uttering to this person, Nifarri. And they are really also very, very worthwhile to look at. The problem with all of this is that the quality of the translation really leaves a great deal to be desired. Apart from its archaic nature, sometimes it's inaccurate. Perhaps maybe some other time. But they're more like maxims, very short sentences. They can be more user-friendly with other, or just more. Into that. Shall we continue in some other direction next time? Any comments, observations?
I see a question. One which you heard from was knowledge, about attention to read. I'll read it in the second one. This is a very puzzling sentence. Work. It's fun. But I think it may involve quite cool. It's not trying to oh my god. It's not for me because they will servant. Thou you find it servants as servants do. But if thou sayest the thing because I am thy Lord, my law will come upon thee and stand between thy praise. The end of that sentence, I'm not pursuing.